Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're standing at the base of a towering pyramid deep in the jungles of the Yucatan. The air is thick with moisture and the scent of wet stone. Vines cling to ancient limestone blocks that were set into place over 1,000 years ago. Above you, the temple rises like a mountain carved by gods. The sun breaks through the canopy, casting shadows that dance across hieroglyphs you cannot read. And then you hear it. A sound. Not from the jungle, not from the wind. It comes from within the pyramid itself. A low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate through the earth beneath your feet. It pulses. It breathes. It feels alive. What you're experiencing isn't imagined. It's real. And it's been waiting there, hidden in plain sight, for centuries. Welcome to the Lost Blueprint. I'm your guide through the forgotten corridors of human history. And today, we descend into one of the most profound mysteries of the ancient world. A mystery that challenges everything we think we know about the Maya, about sound, about the relationship between architecture and consciousness itself. This is the story of the sound chambers inside Mayan pyramids. For decades, archaeologists approached these structures as tombs, as temples, as monuments to kings and gods. And they were right, but only partially, because beneath the surface of these architectural marvels lies something far more sophisticated. Something that suggests the Maya understood principles of acoustics, resonance, and sonic manipulation that would not be discovered by Western science until the 20th century. These weren't just buildings, they were instruments. Today, you will journey with me through time, from the first moment a modern explorer stood inside a Mayan pyramid and heard the impossible, to the cutting-edge research that is only now beginning to decode what the ancients knew all along. You will meet the archaeologists who risked their reputations to speak the unspeakable. You will witness the clash between conventional history and the evidence that refuses to stay silent. And by the end, you will understand why these sound chambers may hold the key not just to understanding the Maya, but to understanding ourselves. The ruins are calling. The echoes are waiting. Let's begin. The jungle keeps its secrets. The year is 1839. American explorer John Lloyd Stephens and British artist Frederick Catherwood hacked their way through the dense rainforests of Central America. They are searching for something most people believe is a myth, the lost cities of a forgotten civilization. And then, through the tangle of vines and the chorus of howler monkeys, they see it. A pyramid, massive, ancient, reclaimed by the jungle but unmistakably made. Not by nature, but by human hands. Hands that moved millions of stones. Hands that carved intricate glyphs into every surface. Hands that built with a precision that seemed impossible for a culture dismissed by history as primitive. Stephens would later write, "The impression made upon our minds by these speaking but unintelligible tablets I shall not attempt to describe. Speaking but unintelligible." Even then, in that first moment of rediscovery, there was the sense that these structures were trying to communicate something lost to time. But what Stephens and Catherwood didn't know, what no one would understand for more than a century, was that the Maya weren't just speaking through their glyphs and carvings. They were speaking through sound itself. Who were the Maya? To understand the sound chambers, we must first understand the people who built them. The Maya were not a single empire, but a collection of city-states spread across what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Their civilization rose around 2000 BCE and reached its zenith during what we call the Classic period, from roughly 250 to 900 CE. They were astronomers who tracked the movements of Venus with accuracy that rivals modern calculations. They were mathematicians who independently invented the concept of zero. They were architects who built cities that aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, the rising of specific stars. But more than anything, the Maya were listeners. Their cosmology was not silent. It was filled with sound. The voice of the jaguar god, the cry of the Quetzal bird, the thunder of Chac, the rain deity. The Maya believed that sound was not merely a sensation, but a force, a way to bridge the world of the living and the world of the gods. And they built their most sacred structures to harness that force, the architecture of the gods. Let's talk about the pyramids themselves. When you stand before El Castillo at Chichen Itza, or Temple Wan at Tikal, or the Pyramid of the Magician at Uxmal, you're looking at more than stone and mortar. You're looking at geometry given form, sacred mathematics carved into the earth. These structures were oriented with astronomical precision. The four sides of El Castillo, for example, each have 91 steps. Add the top platform and you get 365, the number of days in the solar year. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun creates a serpent of light and shadow that descends the pyramid staircase, representing the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. The Maya didn't build randomly. Every angle, every proportion, every stone had purpose. But here's where it gets interesting. In the 1930s, as archaeologists began to excavate and restore these sites, they started noticing something strange. Certain chambers, certain stairways, certain plazas, they sounded different. Voices echoed in unusual ways. Footsteps reverberated. Clapping produced sounds that shouldn't exist. At first, this was dismissed as coincidence, acoustic anomalies, the result of weathering or collapse. But then, in the late 20th century, a few curious researchers began to ask a different question. What if it wasn't an accident? What if the Maya designed these acoustic effects intentionally? The skeptics and the sounds. Let me take you to the year 1998. A man named David Lubman stands at the base of the pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. He's an acoustical engineer, not an archaeologist. He's here because he heard a rumor, a strange story, about a sound that occurs when you clap your hands at the base of the pyramid's grand staircase. Lubman is skeptical, but he's also curious. He claps, and from the pyramid comes a response. Not an echo, not a simple reflection, but a sound that resembles the chirp of a bird, specifically the Quetzal, the sacred bird of the Maya, a creature associated with the god Kukulkan himself. Lubman is stunned. He claps again and again. Each time, the pyramid responds with the same chirping sound, created by the way sound waves reflect off the pyramid's step structure. He begins to calculate, to measure, to analyze. What he discovers is this: the pyramid is functioning as a diffraction grating, a kind of acoustic filter. The geometry of the steps causes sound waves to scatter and recombine in specific ways, creating frequencies that weren't present in the original clap. In other words, the pyramid is transforming sound. But here's the question that haunts Lubman, that haunts every researcher who comes after him. Was this intentional? The resistance. The archaeological establishment is not pleased. To suggest that the Maya deliberately engineered acoustic effects is to suggest they had knowledge of wave physics, harmonic resonance, and sound manipulation, concepts that Western science didn't formalize until the work of scientists like Helmholtz and Rayleigh in the 19th century. It seems impossible, arrogant even, to attribute such sophistication to an ancient culture. And yet, the evidence keeps mounting. In 2002, Belgian researcher Nico de Klerk and his team conduct detailed acoustic studies at Chichen Itza. Using computer models and frequency analysis, they confirm that the pyramid's chirp is not random. The sound closely matches the call of the Quetzal bird at around 1000 to 1500 Hertz. But they go further. De Klerk discovers that at certain locations around the pyramid, human speech is amplified, but only at specific frequencies. A voice speaking at the top of the pyramid can be heard clearly at the base, over 100 feet away, even in a crowded plaza. This is the acoustic signature of a deliberate design. The pyramid isn't just a temple, it's a broadcasting device. Inside the chambers now, we go deeper. Not every Mayan pyramid is solid stone. Many contain interior chambers, hidden rooms, passageways, burial vaults. And it's in these spaces that the acoustic mystery becomes even stranger. At Palenque, in the Temple of Inscriptions, archaeologists discovered a narrow staircase descending into the heart of the pyramid. At the bottom lies the tomb of the great king Quetzal. The chamber is small, claustrophobic, the air is heavy. But speak inside that chamber and something extraordinary happens. Your voice doesn't just echo, it resonates. The stone walls seem to amplify certain frequencies while absorbing others. Low tones, bass frequencies, seem to vibrate through your chest, through your bones. Researchers have measured the resonant frequency of this chamber. It hovers around 110 Hertz. Why does that matter? Because 110 Hertz is not random. It's a frequency that appears again and again in ancient sacred sites around the world. In the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, in Newgrange in Ireland, in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. At this frequency, something happens to the human brain. Studies using EEG technology have shown that exposure to 110 Hertz causes a shift in brain activity. The left hemisphere, associated with language, logic, and analytical thinking, becomes less active. The right hemisphere, associated with intuition, emotion, and holistic perception, becomes more active. In other words, 110 Hertz induces an altered state of consciousness, a trance state, the soundscape of ritual. Imagine now that you are a priest in the Mayan city of Palenque 1,000 years ago. You descend the stone steps into the tomb of the great king. The chamber is lit by torches that flicker and cast dancing shadows on the walls covered in glyphs. You begin to chant, low, rhythmic, repetitive. The chamber responds. Your voice grows. It fills the space. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The vibration moves through your body. Your heartbeat slows. Your breathing deepens. The boundaries between yourself and the stone, between the living and the dead, begin to blur. You are no longer just speaking, you are communing. The Maya didn't need to understand wave physics in the way we do. They didn't need equations or oscilloscopes. They had something else, empirical observation, trial and error. Generation after generation of shamans and priests experimenting with space and sound, learning what shapes produced, what effects, what frequencies opened what doors in the mind. And they encoded this knowledge into their architecture, the Ballcourts and the whisper effect. But the pyramids aren't the only structures with acoustic secrets. Let's talk about the Ballcourts. The Mayan ball game, known as pits, was more than a sport. It was a ritual, a reenactment of cosmic battles between gods. The game was played in long, narrow courts flanked by towering stone walls. And these courts have an acoustic property that is nothing short of miraculous. Stand at one end of the great ball court at Chichen Itza, a structure 550 feet long, and whisper. Your companion at the opposite end, nearly 2 football fields away, can hear you clearly. Whisper, not shout. Whisper. This is called the whispering gallery effect, and it requires an understanding of parabolic reflection, the way curved surfaces can focus sound waves into a narrow beam. The Maya built this without computers, without modern acoustics, without any of the tools we consider essential. How? Because they listened. The lost instruments. There's more. Archaeologists have unearthed Mayan musical instruments, flutes, drums, rattles. But there's one class of artifact that stands out: ceramic vessels with holes, chambers, and tubes that produce haunting, otherworldly tones. Some of these are shaped like animals, others are abstract, geometric. When blown, they produce frequencies that seem designed to disorient, to disturb, to to alter. In 1999, a team led by archaeoacoustician Francisca Zalaquet studied these instruments and found that many produce infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, typically below 20 Hertz. We can't hear infrasound, but we can feel it. It causes unease, anxiety, disorientation. It can induce the sensation of a presence in the room, the feeling of being watched. Some researchers believe the Maya used these instruments in rituals to invoke fear, to simulate the presence of the gods, to create psychological states conducive to religious experience. Others go further. They suggest these sounds were used in the chambers of the pyramids themselves, that initiates would be subjected to infrasound and resonant frequencies in combination, creating an overwhelming sensory experience that would leave them forever changed, reborn. The modern explorers. Fast forward to the 21st century. The tools have changed. Ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, acoustic modeling software. But the questions remain the same. What did the Maya know? In 2018, a team of researchers from the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico announces a stunning discovery. Using advanced imaging technology, they found a hidden chamber inside the pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. This isn't the first chamber discovered inside the pyramid. There are actually 3 pyramids nested inside each other, like Russian dolls, each one built over the previous structure. But this new chamber is different. It's filled with water, or rather, it sits directly above a massive underground river, a cenote, one of the sinkholes that dot the Yucatan landscape. The Maya believe cenotes were portals to the underworld, entrances to Xibalba, the realm of the dead. And here's where it gets extraordinary. The chamber resonates. The water below, the stone above, the geometry of the space, they create a resonance chamber unlike anything else. Sounds produced inside this space would be amplified and distorted in ways that would seem supernatural. The researchers theorized that this was intentional, that the pyramid was built over this specific location because of its acoustic properties, that rituals performed here would have been accompanied by sounds that seemed to come from the gods themselves. The pyramid was speaking, but not to the outside world, to those who descended into its heart. The universal pattern. Here's where we must pause and zoom out, because what we're discovering about the Maya isn't isolated. All over the world, ancient cultures built structures with remarkable acoustic properties. The whispering galleries of the Temple of Heaven in China, the resonant chambers of the Hypogea in Malta, the perfectly tuned sarcophagus in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, the acoustic properties of Stonehenge. These cultures were separated by oceans, by millennia. They had no contact with each other, no shared written language. And yet, they all arrived at the same conclusion. Sound is sacred. Space can be shaped to amplify that sacredness. Why? Perhaps because, at a fundamental level, all humans respond to sound in similar ways. Our brains, our nervous systems, our bodies, they are tuned to certain frequencies. And ancient builders, through careful observation and experimentation, learned to play us like instruments. Or perhaps there's something else, a shared knowledge, a forgotten science that spans the globe and predates the civilizations we think of as the first. Sound and consciousness. Let's return to that frequency, 110 Hertz. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what ancient priests might have known intuitively, that sound can change consciousness. Binaural beats, brainwave entrainment, sonic meditation. These are now mainstream concepts used in therapy, in spiritual practice, in cognitive enhancement. But the Maya didn't have the language of neuroscience. They had something better, direct experience. They knew that certain sounds could bring you closer to the divine, that architecture could be designed to facilitate that journey, that the journey itself was the point. We've spent centuries trying to decode Mayan hieroglyphs, to translate their calendars, to understand their cosmology through written records. But what if the most important messages weren't written at all? What if they were built? What if the pyramids themselves are the texts, and we've only just begun to learn how to read them? The future. Hidden in the past today, architects and sound engineers are rediscovering these principles. Concert halls are designed with acoustic modelling that would have made the Maya nod in recognition. Hospitals are beginning to use sound frequencies to promote healing. Researchers are exploring how infrasound and ultrasound can affect mood, cognition, and even cellular biology. We are, in a sense, catching up to knowledge that was old when Rome was young. And there's a certain poetry to that, because the story of the sound chambers isn't really about the past. It's about what we've forgotten and what we might remember. It's about the idea that technology isn't always forward-moving, that wisdom can be lost, that the ancients weren't primitive. They were different. They paid attention to things we've learned to ignore: the hum of the earth, the resonance of stone, the way sound moves through space and through the body. They built temples that were also instruments, played not with hands, but with voices, with footsteps, with the very act of being present. And perhaps that's the deepest lesson. That architecture, at its highest form, isn't about creating shelter. It's about creating experience. It's about transforming the people who enter the space. The whisper across time. In 2023, a team of researchers used AI to reconstruct what a Mayan ritual inside the Temple of Inscriptions might have sounded like. They modeled the chamber's acoustics. They analyzed the frequencies of discovered instruments. They factored in the chanting techniques that would have been used. And then they played it back. The result is haunting. A low, droning hum, overlaid with higher tones that seem to spiral and shift. Rhythms that feel almost alive. And beneath it all, the resonance of the chamber itself, amplifying and transforming everything. Listening to it, even through modern speakers, produces a visceral response, a tightening in the chest, a tingling at the base of the skull. It feels ancient. It feels true. And it reminds us that the Maya weren't just building for their own time, they were building for ours. The echo that never fades. So we return to where we began. You're standing at the base of a pyramid. The jungle breathes around you. The stone rises above you. And now you understand. This is not a ruin. It's a message. The Maya are speaking to us, not through words, but through the language of vibration, of frequency, of space transformed into experience. They're telling us that there are ways of knowing the world that don't require writing, that don't require machines, that don't require the tools we've come to depend on. Ways that require only attention, listening, presence. The sound chambers inside Mayan pyramids are marvels of engineering. Yes, they are evidence of a sophisticated understanding of acoustics. Yes, but more than that, they are invitations to step inside, to listen, to let the sound move through you and change you. To remember that our ancestors were not less intelligent than us. They simply directed their intelligence toward different questions. Not how do we conquer nature, but how do we harmonize with it? Not how do we dominate space, but how do we make space sacred? And perhaps as we stand here in the 21st century, surrounded by noise, by distraction, by the constant hum of technology. Perhaps we need that invitation more than ever. I want to leave you with this. When the archaeologists first opened the sealed tomb of Quetzal in the Temple of Inscriptions, they found his body adorned with jade, his face covered with a mosaic mask. The chamber was exactly as it had been for over 1,000 years, silent. But as they stood there, measuring, documenting, cataloguing, did any of them pause? Did any of them think to sing? To fill that chamber with sound? To activate its resonance? To hear what the space was designed to reveal? Or had we already forgotten how to listen? The Maya believed that time was not linear, but cyclical, that history repeats, that wisdom lost will eventually return. The sound chambers are still there, in the jungles, in the ruins, waiting. The stones remember. The question is, will we? This is the lost blueprint, and this is only the beginning of what we've forgotten. Until next time, keep listening. The past is speaking. Are you ready to hear it?